YouTube fandom community, Brian Wilson fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about Brian Wilson's 2008 solo album, That Lucky Old Sun, released on Capitol Records September 2nd, 2008. This is one of my favorite Brian Wilson solo albums of all time. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. Start to finish, there isn't one bit of filler on this thing. It's absolutely amazing. And that's the whole review. You know what? That's it. I should just end it right there. But I won't. Yeah, this thing started off. Actually, I wanted to talk about my memories with this thing first before I go into like the facts. Because this album came out, I was in college when this album came out. And I remember vividly how excited I was about this album because the radio station I worked at, we had gotten a flyer, like a promo flyer saying this thing's coming out, Lucky Old Sun. There was a good picture of him. Then we got like this DVD to promote it. It was cool. Showing off how the album was made and all this other stuff. And then when the album came out, I was super stoked about it because only a few years before this, the Smile album came out. Brian Wilson Presents Smile. And I got to see Brian on that tour. And everything I read about him at the time was just about how on fire he was and how creative he was. And I was like, that's cool. And then all of a sudden this thing comes out and you can tell. Every second of this thing is drenched with like that hungry attitude for like creating something really fun and deep and introspective, but also uplifting and sometimes funny and sometimes really sad or heartbreaking. He did it. He created like what I'm going to call Smile Part 2. And I say that because Smile's journey starts off at Plymouth Rock and working your way all through America to get to California where you get those good vibrations. This album is about California. This album is about the trip after getting here, after landing in California. And it's Brian's trip growing up in the 50s and 60s and his memories of what LA used to be like in Southern California, being there with the guys and with his brothers in particular. So I remember in 2007, Midnight's Another Day, a demo of that leaked, or didn't leak, but it came out on Brian's website. And that song absolutely blew me away, and to this day it still blows me away. It's one of the most painfully beautiful songs he's ever written. Obviously Scott Bennett helped with a lot of the lyrics, but it's Brian's soul. Like, that is Brian Wilson. It's an absolute brilliant song, but more on that later. So basically, this album came to be as a piece of what's the word I'm looking for? A project. The South Bank Centre in London reopened, and having had such success with Pet Sounds and then with Smile, asked Brian to come back. They commissioned him to put together some work, and Brian had a couple of songs. Forever Should Be My Surfer Girl was one of the first ones there. And then it just poured out of him. Him and Scott Bennett got together and just started writing. Brian would call up Scott and be like, hey, can I come over? And Scott Bennett was like, yeah, of course, you're Brian Wilson, come on over. Scott is in his band. And his band at this time was absolutely on fire too. His band is still good, but the group that he had around this time and during the Smile era was very good. They started recording this thing on April 20th of 2008 after having already premiered it in London at the end of 2007. They did a few shows over there. So they showed it, they debuted it as a live piece first and then recorded it, which I think Brian Wilson Presents Smile was also that way too, if memory serves me correctly. So yeah, it's an album of reflection. It's an album about looking back, but it's also not only relying on nostalgia, and it's also not only relying on old techniques or old habits. It's completely moving forward and forward thinking, for sure. So it's an absolutely creative masterpiece, if you ask me. So with that, let's just go ahead and jump into this thing. That Lucky Old Sun is a song that dates back to 1949. Frankie Laine had a really popular version of it, but it was written by Beasley Smith and Haven Gillespie. A lot of people covered it. Frank Sinatra, Louis Armstrong, Aretha Franklin, I think even Johnny Cash did it at one point. And when Brian kind of presented this song to the group, they were kind of confused at first. And then once they heard Brian sing it on the piano, up in the morning, work so hard for my pay, that lucky old sun, got nothing to do but roll around heaven all day. They were like, oh yeah, that's a song about Brian Wilson. Working so hard under the sun. That's Brian Wilson. The way he sings it is so touching and it does have like a wistfulness to it, which works really well because it kind of takes you back in time to when Brian was a kid and when this album kind of sets the pace. Um, being in LA in the 50s and 60s, because from what I've read and things I've seen online, people said that LA changed in the late 60s and early 70s. It was a different place. And so maybe it was a little more magical or something, back then or something. I don't know. I wasn't there. Um, but, you know, it is a little bit of like a nostalgia feel, I think, for Brian to get into the mood of the rest of the album as it just jumps into Morning Beat, which is this awesome up-tempo rock and roller. Brian's voice is in fine rock and roll shape on this thing. It's awesome. His voice is totally into it. The warm imagery about the ocean, the Hollywood hills, the piers, the wind, driving around. It's very sunny. It's super spiritual. It's uplifting. And you get caught up in that vibe of euphoria that they're so ecstatic about singing. Like the group vocals on this thing, the instrumentation, everyone's just on fire. They know they have something special and they want to show that off. The peppy syncopation of the words on top of the music is so well executed. Just an absolute smash by a leader who at this point, you don't need to prove yourself anymore. You've made Smile, you made Pet Sounds, you made a bunch of brilliant, brilliant, timeless music that will forever be remembered as America's soundtrack. To come out with a masterpiece this late in your career, amazing. Nothing short of amazing. Then you get some spoken word stuff sprinkled throughout this album by Van Dyke Parks. It's this real poetic take, beatnik kind of style poetry take on LA in the early 60s. So that's pretty cool. Good Kind of Love. Brian sings this with Taylor Mills on during the choruses, and their voices work so well together. Absolute beautiful chemistry. This is like a total nostalgia fest for me, but in a good way. It's got that warm, loving, familiar melody that just makes you feel good to hear it, and it's a nice storyline about falling in love, and some people want to fill the world with silly love songs. So yeah, it's got that catchiness, that familiarness to it, that you've heard this before, but it's got that new Brian flavor to it. Forever She'll Be My Surfer Girl, that's just a classic. Absolute classic. The evocative strings, the chemistry between all the players, the loving emotion sprinkled throughout this thing, and even harkening back and referencing Surfer Girl from the early 60s, he gets away with it on this song. It doesn't come across as cheesy or something. It comes across as really sincere. The bridge, I love the bridge on this thing where Brian sings So Sweet over and over again while they're all doing like their whole thing underneath it. It's one of those songs where it's like, where did that come from? Like, you just had that hanging around in your head? Like, where did that come from? It's been buried away or something. I mean, it's unbelievable how fresh it sounds. And then you get another Van Dyke Parks poem interspersed into this thing. We're talking about the people on the boardwalk pier and, the people trying to sell you things, and I love the part where he says "hot walk." I just love the way he phrases that word "hot walk." I just think that's funny. "Live, Let Live, Not Die" is I would call that like a polite boogie woogie rhythm, where it's kind of got this like waltz time, doo wop kind of echo, inspiration for sure. But I love the lyrics. They're looking for the positive in life. It's got the classic wooden block thing that Brian used to love to do, especially on Let's Go Away for a While. Nice flutes. I love the "Let's Get the Hell Out of Here" line at the end. He sounds so relaxed and so assured of himself that it comes across as like, hey, we're all in the studio having a good time making some really good music and we know it. Let's get the hell out of here. A band in control, a leader in control. Mexican Girl really captures that Mexican flavor. It's got like the great acoustic guitar flourishes, the big sing-along chorus, the finger percussion rather, the mariachi type horns, the party atmosphere. It just has this like swelling party mentality. Very, very fun. And Scott Bennett takes a solo in the middle that sounds totally out of the Mike Love playbook, rhyming words with either different languages and phrasings. Totally a Mike Love thing, but I love it. It works really well. I love the cheering on of LA at the end, the big euphoric LA feel. California Roll is a cool song. Scott sings a lot of this with like an old-timey vaudeville kind of vibe, like coming through an old phonograph. And then Brian comes in. It's a song about dreaming of that California, that special place out west, because California wasn't like too populated until like the 1820s, 1840s, 1850s that people started going over there after being on the East Coast for so long. So California was like this big, amazing place. And that's what this song's about. It's like coming to find your own California role. Who are you gonna be? What do you want to be? You could be an actor. You could be a musician. You could be a politician. You could be someone special. Like, whatever you wanted. California had that. You don't have to climb the Capitol Tower, play the Hollywood Bowl to find your California role. The best part might just be the ride. I love that line. And you get a little bit of a reprise of Lucky Old Sun. Side 2 for me kind of calms down the peppiness and the upbeatness, but in the best way they could have done that. Between Pictures starts this thing off, and it talks about actors, writers trying to make it in L.A., and then that kind of leads to Oxygen in the Brain, which is a beautiful song that Scott barely changed the lyrics on. Brian basically did all the lyrics on this one. It's a song about being a part of life, not letting life go by. It's about getting up in the morning and saying, you know what, I got to do something with my day. I got to be creative, Never destroy when you can create. That's exactly the mentality of this song. It's sprightly, it's uplifting, it's got moments of sadness, but again, it's full of that hunger. That charging chorus is so addictive. It's like, where has this been? How do you not have used that idea already this far into your career? Amazing. And then you get Been Too Long. So if you've been watching my channel, I've never really said like what my favorite Beach Boys song would be. If I absolutely had to pick one in the top 5, Can't Wait Too Long is one of my favorite Beach Boys songs of all time. The melody, the vocal, the lyrics, everything about it is absolute magic. Absolute magic. So this is like a short Spark Notes version of it. Basically just called Been Too Long, where they do like the breathy intro part, the Been Too Long, just that like a couple of times. But it's cool because like, the whole like never destroy when you can create right before this, and then you get this piece of music that was unfinished basically, and here it is, like a part of it is finished. It's on an actual album. So there you go. He didn't destroy. He created. I love that. And having that nostalgia, having that bit of Beach Boys folklore tapped into this thing, leading you into Midnight's Another Day, which is an absolute classic. Words cannot properly express the gravity and the depth of this masterpiece. The parts where he sings, all these people make me feel so alone, you get that big, humongous swell of vocals and cymbals. It's unbelievable. Lost in the Dark, no, All Shades of Grey, Until I Find Midnight's Another Day. I mean, the lyrics are so perfectly about Brian. But that piano, that thunderous, grabbing your attention piano, the patience on this song, his vocal is absolutely amazing. He has some falsetto points that are just unbelievable. It's an absolute brilliant song. I can spend another 15 minutes just talking about that track. But then you get a little bit more of that Lucky Old Sun before it blasts into Going Home, which is just this humongous, uplifting rock and roll extravaganza. Everyone's having a good time. Everyone's playing their hearts out. Brian's voice on this thing just growls with a rock and roll grittiness. It's unreal how much he's into this song. I love the expertly laid out background vocals. I love the at 25 I turned out the lights bit. Talking about Smile basically. And he says, now I'm back. I love the harmonica solo. Everyone just having a big, smiling, humongous grin on their face time while they were making this song, which is great because it's kind of a big last rocker before you get to the last track on here, Southern California, which is an absolute beautiful ballad about Brian as a kid, singing with the band, singing with his brothers, and how much he misses them. It's about a time where you don't have responsibilities. You don't have bills to pay. You don't have jobs to worry about. You don't have to make sure kids you made, don't, not have food for the night. Like, all these things that happen as you grow up and become an adult don't exist when you were a kid. It's an absolute magical place that you don't realize because you haven't had any other experiences yet. It's not until you're a grown-up you can look back and say, like, wow, life was freaking easy when I was a kid. Like, I should have I should have realized that. You don't realize it when you're a kid because you don't know any better. And those years fly by. You know, like it's gone before you can catch up. But the sadness in this song and the tenderness on like the xylophone that creeps in. The lines, you know, when you wake up here, you wake up everywhere, Southern California. You made it. You know, like we made the journey. We traveled across America with Smile. We went through the trip of California. We grew up in California. We got to the future with this. You start off in 1949 with That Lucky Old Sun. You work your way up to 2008 with Southern California, and having gone through the California journey throughout Brian's experience. You know, the vocal, I think, for Brian is one of his best. It's a very smooth vocal, but it's a very challenging vocal. I think it's a really hard song to sing, but he pulls it off. He shines so much on this song. There's a big, like, hallelujah ending with a humongous, striking final note that rings out. And then it ends with this distant coda of That Lucky Old Sun at the very end. And then you're done. That's the whole album. Yeah. I love the artwork in here. Kind of meant to look like old postcards from LA that kind of meshed together. So you got, you know, Capitol Tower here, and then a bunch of like palm trees and just nice imagery, nice colors. Really cool with that. I do like that the inner label, or the actual, you know, the inner sleeve has the lyrics on it, so you can follow along if you want to. And the label itself is a orange. Yeah, so this was Brian's first album back on Capitol Records in years. I think it was his first solo album on Capitol Records, I think. So there was a big, like, you know, to-do having Brian back on Capitol Records. And they say Brian's back. I can't believe I just made that joke. But, that said, this album has stood the test of time. You know, it's been out for 10 years now, almost 10 years. It's just as fresh, it's just as exciting, it's just as beautiful as it was in 2008 and the first time I ever heard this thing. I love this album. If I had to pick a solo album of his that's my favorite, this is up there. This is one of my favorite solo albums by Brian. It's just an absolute perfect piece of work. And I don't think it's overlooked, because I think people do talk about this thing, but when people talk Brian Wilson, they talk about Smile, they talk about the 60s. This album is just as good as anything he's ever done with the Beach Boys or on his own. You can quote me on that one, man. So yeah, this is it. That Lucky Old Sun, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. 10 high fives. 10 Lucky Old Suns out of 10 Lucky Old Suns. I think it's a perfect album. Start to finish, there's not a bad note, not a bad track. Everyone's enjoying themselves. It's a groove. It's an absolute groove. And I think it does tell a story about growing up in Southern California, going through the journeys, going through your roles, going back to California, finding yourself, finding your home again, and then looking back on California. You know, having grown up nowhere near California, it was always seen as this magical place. Growing up with the Beach Boys music as a kid, you had this image of just this perfect nirvana. Everyone's hanging out surfing. Everyone's beautiful. Everyone just walks around going to the hamburger shack and driving their cars, carefree. It's probably not like that. It's probably like real life. I've never been there. But I have these dreams that I will go to California someday. I will go see the places they hung out and visit the place, you know, their old, you know, the plaque where their house was, and, you know, see the beaches they went to, just to experience what that was like and make it real. Same for going to see the Beatles stuff in Liverpool someday. That's dreams of mine through the future. But Brian invokes California, and he made a whole new album about California without sounding tacky or cheesy or just living on the past. So very, very strong work, very well written, very well executed musically, and I think one of the best things he's ever done. My name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Brian Wilson, That Lucky Old Sun, a 10 out of 10 album. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.